This video is the second video in the complex numbers set of videos. In particular, in this video, we're going to be looking at imaginary numbers. Now, imaginary numbers appear when we take the square root of a negative number. If we take a square root of a positive number, such as 9, we get the result of 3. And if we take the square root of a number such as 12 or 13 or 14, we'll get a decimal. However, if we get the square root of a negative number, such as -9, that isn't defined. If you type the square root of -9 into your calculator, it will give you an error. That's because you can't multiply a number by itself and end up with a negative number, as a minus and a minus give a plus, and a plus and a plus give a plus. However, to handle this, mathematicians have defined a new imaginary unit, I, where I is equal to the square root of -1 and I squared is equal to -1. That allows us to get rid of or to rewrite the square root of a negative number without the square root. As you can see here, the square root of -9 is equal to 3. In example 2.1, it says express the square roots of the following negative numbers in the form ki. The first one, in A, we have the square root of -25. The square root of -25 can be rewritten as the square root of 25 multiplied by the square root of -1. The square root of 25 is 5 and the square root of -1 is I, meaning that the square root of -25 can be rewritten as 5i. B is very similar, where we have the square root of -64. That can be rewritten as 64 multiplied by the square root of -1. The square root of 64 is 8, and the square root of -1 is I. For C, we have the square root of -144. That will end up with the square root of 144 multiplied by the square root of -1. The square root of 144 is 12, and the square root of -1 is I. D is the square root of -20. That will simplify to the square root of 20 multiplied by the square root of -1. The square root of 20 can be written as the square root of 4 multiplied by 5, and the square root -1 is the same as having I. This then can be split up into the square root of 4 multiplied by the square root of 5i. The square root of 4 is 2. We have the square root of 5 and I. E is very similar to D. We have the square root of -50. That can change to the square root of 50 multiplied by the square root of -1. The square root of 50 can be rewritten as the square root of 25 multiplied by the square root of 2, and the square root of -1 can be I. The square root of 25 can be written as 5, and the square root of 2, I. F, we have the square root of 288, -288. That can be written as the square root of 288 times the square root of -1. And the square root of 288 can be rewritten as the square root of 144 multiplied by the square root of 2, and then the square root of -1 will end up being I. The square root of 144 is 12. The square root of 2 we leave as the square root of 2, and then I. So what we've done from A to F is we've expressed the square roots in the form ki, where k is some form of number that's not underneath a square root. Now that we have that complete, we've come to the end of the video, and you should be able to rewrite any square root with a negative underneath the square root as an imaginary number where the square root has been left and we have some form of real number multiplied by I.